So, with my calves aching again after at least another 7 hours on foot, there was a significant further gap between which another whole combination of sections of casts came through. Most specifically, this was following a very short, almost Zen-like interlude, which then followed Escape to Athena cast with Elliot Gould arriving, which begun the whole late afternoon section on World War II films. I've already previously mentioned Susanna York, Dame Vera Lynn attending, but there was a significant section also on the Dam Busters with Michael Redgrave. Robert Redford arrived. Robert Duvall and George Segal were in deep conversation in the centre area. I'd already had my chat with Charlton Heston by then, and this migrated into the Bond section with my first meeting of the North Sea Wolf himself, Roger Moore, and tripped over into the Pink Panther section. I had my encounter with the nutty Jerry Lewis, and sometime very close to when Galactica 1980 cast, Kung Fu's cast, I briefly met with Mako, and the Buck Rogers 21st Century cast arrived. They converged almost together. Then there was a little pause again. Then somewhere around in between all that, some of those very sneaky prop guys had darted back in after the Silent Flute cast had come past, and actually taken the prop wall next to the telegraph pole away. But they'd left the pole there. It stayed through most of the World War II section anyway. And then we had sort of like the ending phase with the latest Raiders of the Lost Ark production, the one with Sean, and we then switched to detective series, mostly from America, and we had attendances by a whole range of shows: O'Hara, The Fugitive, The Invaders. I know it's not quite relevant, but it's. But anyway, we had Matt Helm cast come through, and Stacey Keach with the Mike Hammer people. The roundabout then, James Coburn must have snuck back past my attention, because this was around the time, soon after the Matt Helm section, where we had a little brief phase commemorating works of Frank Sinatra leading into Dean Martin. Dean, for obvious reasons, then wasn't on too friendly terms with Jerry Lewis from before, and whilst he'd already been through, people there didn't know much about the Matt Helm series that he'd done of films, the Wrecking Crew, etc. Specifically relevant, and I'm pretty sure that that's when I noticed that James Coburn had returned to his leaning spot at the telegraph pole. This time I'd already switched over to closer to where my dog was, I'd been waiting for my mother to exit the offices of the Globe office, and she was due to depart. Uh, to arrange travel for herself, I believe, at the end of towards the end of the day. But I didn't know how long this event was going to last, so basically I was staying, but my dog was finally departing. It would make stewarding the event a little bit easier from that point onwards. But I had to wait a little while. But eventually, with the passing of the Mike Hammer crew, with Stacey Keach, and even Columbo's Peter Falk. Peter was a marvellous chap. A little chat with him about a couple of things, and I said I enjoyed a film called The Cookie, among other things. So I eventually managed to sidle my way back towards a closer position on the far side of James Coburn, so I was on his left, literally all of about 2.5 foot away, so I could quite clearly see what he was watching on the overhead projector, the OHP, where we were commemorating the detective series and stuff. And he was, occasionally nodding at various TV stars passing by. But his attention got caught when all of a sudden they started doing a major piece upon In Like Flint, among other things, a highly comical Bond spoof movie that he did. A couple of them, he did a couple, and quite a few, surprisingly, probably to himself, a number of the cast ladies who survived did a small parade. I have no idea if they acknowledged each other specifically, because it was quite an amusing coincidence that they should be there on the street at the same time, and I was quite amazed by it. But for obvious reasons, I was sort of like distracted. I didn't want to leave the spot right next to James, just in case he had anything he needed. But equally, I didn't want to miss out on any of the approaching TV stars and the arriving, and keeping the flow of passing tourists around the outside. So I gave people a few directions, etc. But then the tone changed, and they run through a whole sort of montage perspective of James Coburn's film career to date. Now, this is one of the more unusual things in the acting profession. I'd briefly been on stage as a child, so I was quite aware that on many interviews, specifically on Wogan, etc., quite a lot of stars would comment that they really did not either have the time or the inclination to closely re-examine their previous works, their previous performances on film. But here I was, standing next to the legendary James Coburn, and I could see his expression. I could see, as films passed by on the overhead projector, he was actually going through that very, very sort of private and personal moment that you wouldn't see of an actor of his caliber, except if you were family. I mean, he was doing it there whilst he was on the street, right next to me, and I was thinking, I mean, internally I was going, shit. What? I better pay a bit of attention here because you just never know. And every so often there'd be sort of like a little bit of a eye cringe, a little bit of an amused smile, some things, and then they had the scenes from possibly his most spectacular film ever. I mean, he was very happy with the stuff from The Great Escape, quite clearly. The cast who'd been through earlier, which he'd missed. He was very very happy with that. He was very happy with the odd clips, odd clips of some of his westerns, specifically things like Rod Steiger um, with what was it called? A Fistful of Dynamite? Yeah, a Fistful of Dynamite. And we saw those because that was quite an important little film um, in his career as well. But then it changed again back to the World War II films, specifically Cross of Iron, and he was it was like there were moments there where you could clearly see a deep sense of achievement, and in contrast there were moments in that film which were kind of seemed to be devastatingly personally difficult to deal with. His facial expressions were all over the place when the Cross of Iron was on. It was kind of moving because that film is very. It wasn't part of the previous World War II section where the casts had mingled before, which I was surprised about because it's one of the key films covering the German perspectives at the time, and you wouldn't get anything even remotely similar to it, except for like films like Das Boot, who were also attending that day, and much later on a much later attendance at the Rose Theatre, films like Valkyrie with Tom Cruise cast. It basically James Coburn had himself there a very strange little moment, but they concluded slightly happily on a coincidental strange thing where they re-reviewed the very important knife throwing scene from The Magnificent Seven. It was one of the last ones of that section, and it was weird. It's just that strange coincidence. Him going through all those emotions right there on a British street, leaning up against a telegraph pole, whilst visually he's amused and accepting of his performance as the knife thrower Brit in The Magnificent Seven at the same time, and I was there to watch it. It was quite amazing. I got distracted immediately after that, and he he managed to. I managed to miss having a proper greeting until he would return on another Rose Theatre event. But that day in '89 was my equivalent special moment to when I was with Roger Moore earlier. It was, you just don't get that sort of experience normally unless you're sort of like a close relative, or or someone in the industry, and he just quite openly went through that right there on the British street at that moment. I don't know if he's done something similar before or later. You just never know. But it was an interesting moment. Let's put it that way. Um, what's next? Let's see. Oh, I can double back on Mako. Mako is quite interesting, and Brandon Lee. Brandon Lee's the next one coming up. So stay tuned.